This is a dramatized fictional story inspired by Bruce Lee's life and philosophy. Events and dialogue have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes. The door was already swinging shut behind him. That is the detail that stays with you when you hear this story. Not what came after, not the confrontation, not what was said, not what happened in the next 30 minutes that nobody who was present that evening fully agrees on. What stays with you is the door. The fact that he was already leaving, that whatever happened next was not supposed to happen at all. It was the autumn of 1969. Bruce Lee was 35 years old, 135 pounds, and moving through a version of his life that looked, from the outside, like controlled momentum. The Green Hornet had come and gone. Hollywood had taken his ideas, used them, and handed them back slightly smaller than before. He had a school. He had students. He had a son named Brandon who was 4 years old and had his father's eyes. He was building something, though what exactly even Bruce did not always know. That evening he had been at a rented gymnasium in Culver City, a squat concrete building off Washington Boulevard that smelled of rubber mats and old effort. He had been working with a small group, private instruction, not a class, the kind of session he charged real money for and kept deliberately quiet. By 8 o'clock he was done. He had packed his bag, said his goodbyes, and walked toward the exit. Then someone called his name. Here is where the accounts start to differ. I have found 3 separate versions of what was said, who said it, and in what tone. What all 3 versions agree on is this. Bruce stopped, he turned around, and whatever he saw when he turned, it changed what the rest of that night became. The man standing at the back of the room was not one of his students. His name, in most versions of this story, is given only as Kovacs, a surname, nothing more, offered by the people who claim to have been there as though the first name had been deliberately misplaced. He was a big man, 6 feet, maybe a little over. Built the way men are built when they have spent years doing something physically serious, not just lifting, but hitting, grappling, absorbing. He had trained in wrestling and boxing, and more recently in something he called his own system, which is the kind of thing a certain kind of man says when he has run out of teachers who could teach him anything. Kovacs had come, apparently, because someone had told him something. What they told him was that Bruce Lee was a performer, that what he demonstrated in his sessions was speed dressed up as power, coordination mistaken for combat ability. That in a real situation, the kind without rules, without an audience, without the benefit of a chosen opponent, Bruce Lee would be something very different from what people paid to see. This was not a new accusation. Bruce had heard versions of it in San Francisco in 1965, in Oakland before that, in Hong Kong before that still. The accusation followed him the way certain accusations follow people who are very good at things, as a kind of tax, paid by those who cannot otherwise explain what they are seeing. But something about the way this particular version was delivered, the tone, the setting, the fact that Bruce was already halfway out the door when it reached him, something produced a response that surprised even the people who knew him. He put his bag down. "What do you want to know?" Bruce said. What Kovacs wanted was not quite what he said he wanted. That much at least the accounts agree on. He said he wanted a demonstration. He said he had heard things and wanted to see for himself. He spoke with the careful politeness of a man who has practiced being polite, while meaning something else entirely. The gymnasium was quiet. The students who remained, there were perhaps 5 or 6 of them, understood that something had shifted in the air of the room, the way you understand a change in weather before you can articulate what changed. Bruce looked at him for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "All right, show me what you know first. I want to be honest about something. I spent a long time trying to find corroboration for the specific exchanges in what follows. What I found is a wall of second-hand. People who claim to have been there give accounts that are consistent in outline and contradictory in detail, which is, in my experience, usually the signature of something that actually happened, as opposed to something that was invented whole. Invented stories tend to be too clean. This one has the texture of something real." Kovacs moved into the center of the mat. He was fluid for his size, that was noted by multiple witnesses, and he knew what he was doing with his hands. He threw a combination, shadow boxing, demonstrating range and speed with the confidence of someone who was used to impressing people this way. It was, by all accounts, genuinely impressive. He finished and looked at Bruce. Bruce had not moved from where he was standing. "Again," Bruce said, "but slower." This was not what Kovacs expected. You can hear it in the way the witnesses describe his reaction. A brief hesitation, a reset. Slower was not an instruction that flattered a demonstration of speed, but he did it. He ran through the combination again, this time at half pace. Bruce watched. He watched the way a man watches a lock he is about to pick, not the surface, but the mechanism. Then he said something that nobody in the room was expecting. "Your left shoulder drops before you commit, every time." Silence. "That's not a criticism," Bruce said. "That's information. The question is what you want to do with it." Here is what you have to understand about what Bruce was doing in that moment. He was not being generous. He was not performing magnanimity for an audience of students. What he was doing was something far more specific. He was changing the nature of the encounter. Kovacs had come in carrying the frame of a challenge. Bruce had just replaced that frame with something else. He had turned a confrontation into a lesson. And he had done it so quickly, so naturally, that Kovacs was now standing in the middle of a gymnasium receiving instruction from the man he had come to discredit. This is the move that people who study Bruce Lee spend years trying to understand. Not the physical techniques. Those are documented, filmed, demonstrable. The other thing. The way he could walk into a room's emotional architecture and rearrange it without announcing that he was doing so. Kovacs stood there for a moment. Then, according to the people who were present, he laughed. Not a good laugh. A short, tight sound that meant he had noticed what just happened and did not appreciate it. "I didn't come here for a lesson," he said. "I know," Bruce said, "but that's what's available." What followed next is the part of the story where accounts diverge most significantly. Some versions say Kovacs threw a punch, not full speed, not aimed to hurt, but thrown, a test. Some versions say he simply moved into range without permission, which in the language of martial arts is its own kind of statement. Some versions say Bruce moved first, responding to something in Kovacs' posture that only he could read. What every version agrees on is what happened next. Kovacs went down. Not violently. That is a specific detail that witnesses return to. There was no impact that echoed through the building. There was no drama in the conventional sense. What there was, by all accounts, was an absence. One moment Kovacs was standing, moving with intent toward Bruce Lee. The next moment he was on the mat, face up, and Bruce was standing beside him in approximately the same position he had been in a moment before, like something had simply been subtracted from the situation. Kovacs lay there. He was not hurt. He was, by all accounts, still. Bruce crouched beside him. This detail appears in every version of the story, and it is the one I find myself returning to most. "The shoulder," Bruce said quietly. "Did you feel it?" Let me tell you something about the particular quality of humiliation that lives in that question. If you have ever been good at something, genuinely good, the kind of good that took years, and then encountered someone who was better in a way you did not fully understand, you know the specific weight of that moment. It is not pain exactly, it is more like a rearrangement. The story you have been telling yourself about yourself suddenly requires revision, and revisions are expensive. Kovacs stared at the ceiling of that gymnasium in Culver City for what witnesses describe as a long moment. Then he said something. The versions disagree on what it was. In one account, he said nothing at all. In another, he said, yes. In the third account, the one I find least likely to be accurate but somehow the most interesting, he said, "Show me." Bruce stood up. He picked up his bag from where he had set it down by the door. He looked at Kovacs, who had gotten to his feet by then. "Come back on Thursday," Bruce said. "We start at 7. Then he left. I have no way of knowing whether Kovacs came back on Thursday. The trail goes cold there, in the way that so many trails in this story go cold. At the moment of potential transformation, right where you most want to know what happened next. That silence might mean anything. It might mean the story was simplified in the retelling. It might mean the ending was too ordinary to remember. It might mean that Kovacs went home, sat with what had happened, and simply never came back, which is also an ending, and not an uncommon one. What I do know is that multiple people who trained with Bruce Lee in the years around that period describe a specific instruction he gave them, an instruction that appears across enough independent accounts that it seems to have been something he returned to repeatedly. He told them, "The moment you stop learning from an opponent, you have already lost." Not lost the fight, lost something more important than the fight. This is the thing that is easy to miss about Bruce Lee if you approach him from a certain angle. If you come to him through the films, through the mythology, through the image of pure physical capability. The physical capability was real. There is no serious question about that. But the physical capability was downstream of something else. It was downstream of a specific relationship to being wrong, a genuine appetite for the information contained in failure that most people, most of the time, experience as too expensive to pay attention to. Kovacs had walked into that gymnasium carrying a challenge. He had believed something about the man he was challenging, and within 10 minutes, everything he believed had been tested against reality, and reality had produced a result he was not prepared for. That is a brutal experience. Most people in that situation find a way to leave without absorbing what just happened. They reconstruct their prior beliefs. They add qualifications. They find explanations that allow them to exit without having actually learned anything. The question that this particular evening leaves you with, the question that stays, is not whether Bruce Lee could fight. That question has an answer. The question is what Kovacs did with Thursday. Because in some sense, that is the only question that has ever mattered about any of this. Not what Bruce could do. What you do with what you just saw. Bruce Lee walked out of a gymnasium in Culver City on an autumn evening in 1969 and drove home to his family. He had been delayed, maybe 40 minutes, by something that was not supposed to happen. He had set his bag down when he could have kept walking. He had turned around when he could have pretended not to hear. There is a version of that evening where he does not turn around, where the door swings shut and Kovacs says what he said to an empty room and goes home having confirmed, by default, his prior belief. That version is tidier. It resolves without friction. Nobody has to revise anything. Bruce turned around. That is the whole story, in 3 words. He turned around. Everything that followed, the demonstration, the takedown, the offer of instruction, the question crouching by a man on a mat, all of it was downstream of that single decision. To not keep walking. To engage with the thing that was trying to challenge you rather than move around it. 5 feet 7 inches, 135 pounds, standing in a doorway, already half gone, turning back. What he understood, what the whole arc of that evening keeps pointing toward, is something that sounds simple and is not. That the challenge standing behind you calling your name is almost never actually about what it says it's about. Kovacs was not there to disprove Bruce Lee. He was there because he needed something to be true about himself, and he had chosen, for reasons of his own, to look for that proof in a room where Bruce Lee was. That is its own kind of searching. It is a crooked kind of searching, and it can turn ugly fast, but at its root it is a person trying to find out what they are made of. Bruce understood that. He had been that person, in different rooms, at different ages. He put his bag down. There is a thing that happens sometimes, in the middle of a night that was not supposed to matter, when someone who is very good at something does something small, not the big impressive thing, not the demonstration, but the small thing. The quiet redirection, the crouching beside someone on a mat and asking a question. There is a moment like that buried in this story, and it is not the takedown. The takedown was real, and it was probably extraordinary, and it lasted perhaps 2 seconds. The crouching lasted longer. The question lasted longer still. Come back on Thursday. That sentence has been sitting in this story since the moment it was spoken, and I keep returning to it because it seems to me to be the most telling thing Bruce Lee said that night. Not the technical correction, not whatever happened in the brief physical exchange. That sentence, that invitation, delivered to a man who had just tried to embarrass him, offered without apparent anger or performance. That sentence is a window into something. An invitation is not a victory lap. You don't invite someone back unless you mean it. You don't say Thursday with a time attached unless you're genuinely prepared to be there when Thursday arrives. What Bruce was offering was not charity, it was continuation. He was saying, this doesn't have to end here. There is more available if you want it. Whether Kovacs wanted it, we don't know. Whether you want it, that's the question the story leaves behind, quiet and patient, after everything else has settled. The door was already swinging shut. He turned around. That was always going to be the whole thing.